everyone, and happy Wednesday! My goal for this week's video is to show you that you don't need to know everything there is to know about painting with watercolors to get going. Really, all you need to do is grab your paint supplies and get going, because the absolute best way to learn is to actually paint. And when I set out to paint, I always give myself the goal of experimenting, playing, and learning something along the way. And when I do that, I usually am very happy no matter what the results turn out to be. Of course, sometimes the results are results I'm super happy with, and other times maybe I don't like them so much, but it's all good as long as I learn something along the way. So I don't really have a set plan in mind for this week's painting. I know I'm going to be creating an abstract. That's usually what I do. That's what I like to do and how I prefer to paint. I know I also want to work with blues and I want to work with gold, because gold and blue together are magical. So I love that. And then the rest is, again, just going to be about experimenting. I'm just going to start throwing paint on my paper. And as I go along, I'm going to make my decisions. I'm also going to try to play with rubbing alcohol, because I haven't done that in a while and it can create some cool effects. I don't know if as I go along, the things that I do are things that are going to show in the final painting. But that's not the whole, the whole point. The whole point is to paint, because as I'm painting, I'm learning and developing my skills, and I hope that you can give yourself permission to do that as well. So grab your paint supplies and let's get going. I'm starting my process with the biggest watercolor brush I own, which is my mop brush, and I'm adding a light wash of color to the background. And I have not really deliberately picked this color. It just so happened that it was the color that was left on my palette. And I'm adding a little bit of blue because I said I wanted to work with blue, but really this is just to get the process going, to get rid of the white on my paper and to sort of prevent myself from getting stuck in analysis paralysis. That can happen when you're looking at a blank page, and it can be very hindering when it comes to the creative process. So the first thing to do is just to get that white paper covered up with some paint, and as we go along, we'll figure out what we're going to do next. I've got a fair amount of water on my paper at this point, so I've decided to come in with some coarse grained salt, because usually that works really well when the paper is very wet. And again, I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to do, but I'm dropping some of that salt on the bottom, because if by chance I decide I want to create something that's landscape-like, this could work really well. But anything is changeable as I go along. So I'm starting this way and it may change later on. We shall see. So I'll drop some coarse grained salt on the bottom, and I'm also going to bring in some fine grained table salt on the top half of the background that I've created so far. And I'm doing this just so it creates some texture, and this texture will help me figure out what I want to do next. After adding the coarse grain salt, I often also like to come back in and drop some paint onto the granules of salt because that will just help to leave even more marks and more distinct marks on the paper. And so I know I want to work with blues, and right now the background is very light, so I'm hoping that whatever marks I add at this point will potentially be visible at the very end of my painting process. But at the very least, I want to enhance the colors and hopefully enhance the marks left by the salt. Once my paper is completely dry, I come in with a plastic card and I scrape the salt off the paper. I keep the more large grains of salt because I can reuse them. And I don't really care so much that they picked up on some colors. Sometimes that can actually add some cool effects to another painting. And I feel like if there's a chance for me to save anything, I usually prefer to do that so that I'm not wasting any of my supplies. I've decided to spritz my paper with water before adding the color because I don't really want to scrub the color onto the paper. Doing so would potentially rub out some of the marks that I've made with the salt. And so I just want to be dropping some paint. I want to start intensifying my colors at this point. And having that water on top of the paper will help me add more color without actually scrubbing the paper with my brush. So at this point, I'm going to use some rubbing alcohol and a pipette. I'm going to take some rubbing alcohol directly from the bottle and I'm going to start dropping it onto the surface of my paper. It's really interesting to see how the alcohol reacts to the wet paint. And sometimes this is a neat way also to create some marks that can help inspire your next step in your painting process. I don't really have a set goal in mind in doing this. Again, it's just experimental play, and maybe somewhere along the road, I will decide to use some of these marks that are left by the alcohol in the paint, and maybe I won't. But as I'm doing this, I'm learning something about how alcohol reacts to wet paint, and I'm also learning how I can create marks in watercolor using different substances. And so this is really interesting. Now, adding the paint in drops can create some neat circles. You can also sort of paint with the alcohol as well. As it brushes the surface of the paper, it sort of repels the paint, and that can help to create some interesting marks as well. Again, I don't really have a set plan for this. I'm just playing, I'm experimenting, and some of what's happening here will surely inspire me for what I'm going to do next. Although I'm not overly fond of the wavy lines I created using the rubbing alcohol, I do like the idea of them. And so now I'm going to come in with my paintbrush and I'm going to start working on creating more of these wavy lines in the background of my painting. It's again, it's an abstract painting. I don't really know 100% where I'm heading with this, but I like the idea of the waves. The background of this painting, of course, being that it's blue, is reminding me of water. And um, why not add some waves? Water adapts really well to different elements and it can move very freely. And I want to sort of capture that essence within this painting. I'm really loving those wavy lines I've added on top. So now I'm going to come in with a slightly different color of blue and I'm going to work on creating the same type of effect on the bottom part of the painting. I was having so much fun that I forgot to turn my camera on when I started adding this blackberry color to my painting. I basically am doing so on all sections of the painting, on both of the different colors, the bright blue and the turquoise blue, because I want to create some value contrast. And I'm really loving how this is turning out so far. It's becoming a lot more interesting, and it would have never really come to this point had I not been experimenting with the rubbing alcohol. So there you go. I learned something about using the rubbing alcohol. Maybe the marks themselves are not still visible, but it did leave an impression on me and it helped guide me in my next decision for this painting. So I'm really happy that I did that. I feel like I've really done a pretty good job adding some dark value contrast to my painting, so now I want to work on building up my light value contrast. And this will help to give more visual interest to my painting. As I'm doing this, I'm going to be working with some iridescent colors, so I'll be adding light value contrast, and I'll also be adding some contrast with the fact that I'm using an iridescent color as opposed to the matte colors that are in the background. I suppose there's already quite a bit going on in this painting that I really probably don't need to add any other details in order to make it interesting. But I do like to add sometimes some little light elements that aren't very visible. They're a little bit more subtle, and so they draw the attention in a little closer. And they're not details that jump out at you, but I do find that they add some interest, and so I like to do that. Plus, adding these little details for me is a really good way to practice hand-eye coordination. And so I love to give myself a few guidelines using my ruler, and then I come in and I freehand the rest of my lines. That means my lines are going to be very organic. They're not necessarily going to be perfect, but they're perfectly imperfect. And I love it that way. I said from the beginning that I really wanted to work with blue and gold, and so I feel like this is the point in time for me to add it. I wanted to add some more lines using the gold, but I'm feeling a little timid at this point, so I'm just gonna ease into the process, and I'm gonna add a little bit of gold into the center of these little circles that I created. And after I've done that, I'll see if I'm feeling ready to add some more. My courage and determination have set in, and so I'm going for it. I'm adding some more gold using a line work, and I'm gonna sort of paint them in a little bit like I would do when I'm working with neurographic art. And I think this is gonna help to brighten things up in the painting. I love monochromatic paintings, but sometimes I don't know. I feel like they need a little something something. And in this case, I felt like I needed to leave the monochromatic scheme behind and add some gold because I think it's really going to help brighten things up. That gold was just what my intuition was calling for, and I'm really happy I added it. So now I'm feeling like my painting is ready for its big reveal. So I'm removing the tape and I'll bring you in for a closer look. I had no idea at the beginning of this painting process that this is where I would head, but I am so happy that my intuition guided me to go in this direction. I love the addition of that gold next to the blue and the iridescent um, blue pearl and the magic green. Everything works so well together. And it was really a lot of fun to create this painting. I hope you were either able to paint along with me or that you're feeling inspired to start painting. Thank you for making the time to join me on my creative journey. I hope you have a wonderful week and happy creating!